So you want to buy a Formula One team, build a factory in England, hire two of the fastest drivers alive, paint your logo on the side of a very fast car and roll it onto a starting grid in Monaco, in Silverstone, in Abu Dhabi. 350 kilometers an hour, live television, hundreds of millions of people watching, 24 weekends a year. It sounds like the greatest business on earth. But here's the strange part. For most of the last 30 years, owning a Formula One team was one of the fastest ways ever invented to destroy a fortune. Not small fortunes, billion-dollar fortunes, belonging to some of the richest people alive. The reason was brutally simple. Running a front-running team could cost you north of $400 million a year. The cars, the engines, hundreds of engineers, and a star driver whose salary alone ran into the tens of millions. And if you finished last, the sport handed you back almost nothing. A few tens of millions in prize money against a spend of nearly $500 million. You could burn through $400 million, watch your cars fail on live television in front of the entire planet, and then do the whole thing again next year. And people did, for decades. Car makers, billionaires, cigarette barons, Russian oligarchs, all lining up to lose money on this sport. Because for reasons nobody could quite fit on a spreadsheet, being in it was worth more than the money it ate. Then, in 2017, an American media company bought Formula One for billions. And very quietly, they changed one thing about how the entire sport worked. The effect was almost unbelievable. Teams that had been worth $200 million were suddenly valued at $3 billion. A team scrapping near the back of the grid, nowhere near a championship, was valued at $900 million. And the team that finishes dead last today doesn't limp home with scraps anymore. It collects tens of millions in guaranteed money every single year just for being one of the 10. The math didn't just improve, it flipped completely upside down. The sport that spent 30 years bankrupting billionaires now mints them. And the queue of people trying to buy in has never been longer, even as the price to get through the door keeps climbing. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what that American company changed and why it rewired the whole business. Why the team that comes last can now earn almost as much as the team that comes first. Why there are only 10 of these teams on the entire planet, and why that single number is the most valuable thing in the sport. And why the smartest owners in Formula One quietly stopped chasing trophies and started chasing something the cameras never point at. Because Formula One stopped being just a race a long time ago. The car is the show. The real fortune is something only 10 owners on Earth are allowed to hold. And you can't see it from the grandstands. You've basically got two options. Option 1, build your own team from scratch. In theory, this is the romantic route. Your name, your colors, your machine, built from nothing. In practice, it is almost impossible. And we'll come back to why. In a moment. Option 2, the realistic one, buy a team that already exists. And here, just like buying a house or a football club, there's a menu, and the prices are staggering at the entry level. If that phrase means anything when we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, you're looking at a team fighting in the middle or the back of the grid. In 2023, the carmaker Renault sold a minority slice of its Alpine team to a group of American investors in a deal that valued the whole team at just over $900 million. That's for an outfit that spends most Sundays nowhere near the podium, move up to a genuine front-runner, and the numbers stop making sense. A top team today is valued anywhere from $3 to nearly $5 billion. Ferrari alone, the most valuable team in the sport, has been valued at close to $5 billion. Mercedes, McLaren, Red Bull, all in the same stratosphere. And then there are the teams you simply cannot buy at any price. Ferrari will never be sold. It's the crown jewel of an entire country's identity. The manufacturer teams, tied to giant car makers, aren't assets on the market. They're marketing machines their owners will not part with. Just like every other business we've looked at, the very best ones aren't for sale. Okay, say you've got the billion or the 3 billion and you've bought your team. Here's the part nobody warns you about. You haven't finished spending. You've barely started. For years, Formula One had no spending limit at all. And the richest teams simply outspent everyone north of $400 million a year. So, in 2021, the sport did something radical. It introduced a cost cap, a hard ceiling on how much a team can spend on the actual performance of the car. Today, that cap sits at around $135 million a year. Rising to $215 million for the new era of cars sounds like relief. It isn't. Not for your wallet, because the cost cap has holes in it big enough to drive a transporter through. Driver salaries don't count toward it. The 3 highest paid staff don't count. Marketing doesn't count. Travel, hauling tons of equipment around the world to 24 races a year, doesn't count. And your engine, if you're buying it from someone else, is a separate bill of around $15 million a season on its own stacker. All of that on top of the capped $135 million, and the real cost of running a competitive Formula One team lands somewhere north of $200 million every single year. Before you've won a thing, and your single biggest uncapped expense is the person whose face sells the whole show. The very best drivers on the grid command $40 to $50 million a year. In salary alone, you are, in effect, paying a small nation's budget to one human being to sit in your car and praying he doesn't put it into a wall now. Remember option 1, building your own team from scratch. This is where it gets interesting, because it turns out the hardest thing to buy in all of Formula One isn't the factory or the drivers or the engine. It's permission. There are only 10 teams in Formula One. For years, exactly 10. That number is not an accident. It's written into a contract called the Concord Agreement, the deal that binds the teams, the sports owners, and the governing body together. And that contract is built to keep the door shut. If you want to add an 11th team, you don't just fill out a form. You have to pay what's called an anti-dilution fee, a payment historically set at $200 million handed to the existing teams to compensate them for slicing the pie into more pieces. And even that, it turns out, might not be enough to get you in. Michael Andretti is one of the most famous names in American motorsport. A former F1 driver himself, son of a world champion, running one of the most successful racing organizations in the United States. He wanted in, and he didn't come alone. He brought General Motors, Cadillac, one of the largest car makers on earth, ready to build engines and pour in money. By any normal logic, that's a dream applicant. A legendary racing name, a global manufacturer, and hundreds of millions of dollars behind it. The governing body approved them. And then, in early 2024, the sport's commercial owners said no. The reasoning, stripped of the diplomacy, was simple. The existing teams didn't want to split their money 11 ways. A new team would dilute everyone's share of the sport's revenue, and a $200 million entry fee wasn't seen as nearly enough to make up for it. The most powerful people in the paddock effectively closed ranks to keep a Cadillac-backed, Andretti-led team off their grid. It took a restructuring and General Motors committing to build its own engine before the door finally cracked open. With the team cleared to join as Cadillac in 2026 and Michael Andretti himself stepping back from the project he'd started, sit with that for a second. In almost any other industry, if you have the money and the credentials, you can start a business. In Formula One, you can have a legendary name, a giant car maker, and a blank check. And the 10 people already inside the room still vote to keep you out, which tells you something important. The value here isn't really in the cars, or the trophies, or even the racing. The value is in the door itself, and in the fact that only 10 keys exist. But a key is only worth something if the room behind it is full of money. For 30 years, it wasn't. So what exactly is behind that door now, and why is everyone suddenly desperate to get in? That's where the real business begins. So let's step behind the door and look at how a Formula One team is actually supposed to make money. Officially, there are 2 taps. The first is sponsorship. Every logo plastered over the car, the driver's overalls, the pit wall, each one is a company paying for space. A title sponsor, the big name on the side pod, can be worth tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars a year. For decades, this was how teams survived. You sold every inch of the car, and you prayed it was enough to cover the bleeding. The second tap is prize money. And here's the crucial part. In Formula One, prize money doesn't come from winning a single race. There's no check handed over on the podium. Instead, at the end of the season, Formula One itself takes the enormous pile of money it earns from the whole sport and hands a slice of it back to the teams. That's changed everything. So, follow the money. Formula One, as a business, earns from three main sources. Race promotion fees, the tens of millions each city pays for the privilege of hosting a Grand Prix. Media rights, what broadcasters around the world pay to televise it. And sponsorship, the sport's own global partners. Add it up, and in 2024, Formula One pulled in around $3.7 billion in a single year. Now, here's the mechanism at the heart of the whole sport. It's called the Concord Agreement, the secret contract that dictates how all that money is divided. And under it, roughly half of Formula One's earnings paid back out to the 10 teams. In recent years, that pool has swelled to around $1.2 billion, split between them every single season. How is it split? Partly equally. Every team that qualifies gets a base payment just for being there. Partly by performance, the higher you finish in the championship, the bigger your slice. And then there's Ferrari, which, because it is Ferrari, present since the sport's very first season, collects a special historic bonus worth at least 5% of the entire prize fund, and in some years, even more. Money it takes home, whether it wins the title or finishes near the back, so even the team that comes dead last still walks away with something like $60 million a year from this pool, just for turning up. Remember when I said that? In the old days, finishing last got you almost nothing. This is what changed, but the number alone isn't the revelation. The revelation is what happens when you put that guaranteed income next to the cost cap. Here it is. Before 2021, teams could spend whatever they wanted, and they did. The big ones burned through $400 million a year chasing lap time. So, no matter how much prize money came in, it vanished into the machine. These teams weren't businesses, they were bonfires with a logo on the side. As recently as 2021, only 2 teams on the entire grid, Mercedes and Red Bull, actually turned a profit. And even then, only around $10 to $20 million each. Then, Liberty Media, the American company that bought the sport, did 2 things at once. They grew the pie: new races in Miami and Las Vegas, a Netflix show that pulled in millions of new fans, richer television deals around the world, and they capped the spending, that $135 million ceiling. Think about what that combination does. The money coming in goes up. The money you're allowed to spend is locked down. And suddenly, for the first time in the sport's history, the gap between the two isn't a loss, it's a profit. Today, around 70% of Formula One teams operate profitably. In 2025, Mercedes alone reported a record profit north of $200 million. The bonfire had become a bank, and this is the reveal that reframes the entire business. You are not, it turns out, in the business of winning races. You are in the business of owning one of exactly 10 guaranteed seats at a table that now pays out more than $1 billion a year, with a legal limit on how much you're allowed to lose. Winning is nice, winning gets you a bigger slice, but you no longer need to win to make money, you just need to exist. That is why a team fighting at the back of the grid can be worth $900 million. That is why the door has only 10 keys, and why the people already inside voted to keep an 11th out. They weren't protecting a racing series. They were protecting the value of a franchise, and nobody has ever demonstrated that more perfectly than a man named Toto Wolff. In 2013, Wolff, a former racing driver turned investor, did something that looked, at the time, almost eccentric. He bought a stake of around 30% in the Mercedes Formula car giant, just the racing team. The price was roughly $165 million. Back then, that was a bold bet on a team that had won nothing in its modern form. And Wolff didn't just buy in and watch. He ran it, became team principal, and built it into the most dominant team the sport had ever seen. 8 straight Constructors' Championships, but here's the part that matters for our story. In 2025, that Mercedes team was valued at around $6 billion. Wolff's stake, the one he bought for $165 million, is now worth close to $2 billion. He didn't just win races. He bought a franchise slot before the world understood what it was worth, and rode it from $165 million to nearly $2 billion. The trophies made him famous. The slot made him rich. And once you understand that the real asset was never the car, It was the seat at the table. You start to see why the smartest money on earth is now scrambling to get in, and why the ones who bet early made fortunes. But you also start to see the trap, because for most of this sport's history, that same seat destroyed almost everyone who sat in it. And the graveyard of Formula One is full of famous names who bought the car and never understood the business. Now that you understand the business, look back down the grid and you'll see it's built on a graveyard. Because for every Toto Wolff who bought the slot and rode it to billions, there are the ghosts of teams that bought the car and never survived long enough to see what it became. Go back to 2010. Formula One announced it was letting in new teams, and it dangled an irresistible carrot. A proposed budget cap of just $65 million. Cheap. Accessible. A real chance for a small, smart operation to make it. 3 new teams signed up on exactly that promise. A Spanish outfit called HRT, a British-backed team called Virgin, later Marussia, and a team carrying the Lotus, later Caterham, name. Then, the sport quietly killed the budget cap and the trap snapped shut. These teams had built their entire business plan around spending $65 million a year. Now, they were in a sport where the big teams spent $400 million, with no floor, no protection, and almost no prize money for finishing at the back. They'd been sent into a knife fight, having budgeted for a picnic. HRT never scored a single point in 3 seasons. It folded at the end of 2012, its cars ending up in a private collection. Caterham burned through its owner's fortune, went into administration in the autumn of 2014, started missing races, and by the end of the year, was finished. Also without a single championship point to its name. But the hardest story is Marussia in May 2014, on the streets of Monaco. A young French driver named Jules Bianchi did something extraordinary. Driving for a team everyone had written off, a genuine backmarker, he finished 9th and scored Marussia's first ever points. For a tiny team scraping to survive, it was everything. Those 2 points were, quite literally, worth millions in the standings. 5 months later, at a wet, darkening Japanese Grand Prix, Bianchi's car slid off the track and struck a recovery vehicle. He suffered catastrophic head injuries. He never woke up and died the following July at just 25. The sport's first driver fatality in over 2 decades. Within weeks of his crash, the team itself collapsed. Marussia went into administration, owing around £60 million. Money owed even to giants like McLaren and Ferrari. It was patched back together, renamed Manor, limped on for 2 more seasons, and then, in early 2017, quietly shut its doors for good. No savior came. The most human, most heartbreaking underdog story in modern Formula One ended in an empty factory. That's the pattern. Every one of these teams thought the product was the car. They spent everything on the machine and got wiped out the moment the money ran short, because they never owned anything but the racing. And here's the part that should really stop you. It wasn't just the small teams. Williams is one of the most successful names in the history of the sport. 9 Constructors' Championships, founded by Sir Frank Williams, a man who ran his team from a wheelchair for decades after a road crash left him paralyzed, and who never stopped fighting. And yet, by 2020, even Williams couldn't survive the old economics. Bleeding money and out of road, the founding family sold the team to an American investment firm for a reported $180 million. And after 43 years and more than 700 races, the Williams family walked away from the sport entirely. They sold in 2020. The cost cap arrived in 2021. They stepped out of the door 1 year before the room behind it filled with gold. That is how brutal the timing of this business can be. Because look at what that same door is worth now. When Cadillac, General Motors, finally forced its way onto the grid for 2026, it didn't pay the old $200 million entry fee. By then, everyone had realized $200 million was far too cheap for what a slot had become. So, Cadillac paid an anti-dilution fee of around $450 million, more than double, just for permission to exist, handed straight to the 10 teams already inside. And even that looks like a bargain. Red Bull, which owns a second A junior team called Racing Bulls was recently offered $2.3 billion for it and said no. According to people in the sport, Red Bull now fields roughly one offer a month for that team. Audi has bought its way in by taking over another. The queue that used to be empty now stretches around the block. The engine behind all of it is a single number. In 2017, when Liberty Media took over, Formula One's business generated about $1.7 billion a year. By 2024, that had more than doubled to nearly $3.9 billion. The pie exploded. And because the door has only 10, now 11 keys, every one of those keys exploded in value with it. So the smartest operators in Formula One today aren't the ones obsessed with winning next Sunday. They're the ones who understood early that they were sitting on an appreciating asset in one of the fastest growing sports on earth, and that the trophy is just the marketing that keeps the value climbing, which leaves only one question. If the racing barely matters and the real prize is the slot, then what exactly are you buying when you spend $2, $3, or $4 billion on a Formula One team? And can the math actually make you money, or are you just the next name the graveyard is waiting for? Let's run the numbers. So, you've decided to do it. Let's see. What actually happens to your money? Optimistic scenario. You buy a front-running team for around $3 billion. Under the cost cap, you're only allowed to spend about $135 million on the car. So the operation finally behaves like a real business. Prize money brings in well over $100 million a year. Sponsors pay a fortune to sit on a winning machine. And, like Mercedes in 2025, you post a profit north of $200 million. But that's the small part. The real return is the asset itself. F1 team values have been climbing 40 to 50% a year. Buy at $3 billion, and after a few good years, you could be sitting on 4, 5, even 6. You didn't just run a race team, you bought an appreciating asset that hands you a profit while it grows. Realistic scenario. You can't stretch to a front runner, so you buy a midfield team for around $1 billion. You won't win, you might not even see the podium, but you still collect $60 to $100 million a year in guaranteed money just for being one of the 10. You run close to break even under the cap, and your slot quietly appreciates in the background. You make almost nothing from the racing and most of your fortune on the day you eventually sell. Just like the investors who bought into Alpine or the fund that bought Williams for $180 million and watched it multiply. Worst case scenario. You buy at the very top of the market, seduced by the hype. Then, the growth stalls. The Netflix boom cools. A new Concord agreement trims the payouts, a recession scares off the sponsors. Or you simply mismanage the parts the cost cap doesn't cover and bleed money on drivers and staff. Suddenly, your appreciating asset stops appreciating, and you're left holding a very expensive car with a very famous name. Ask Frank Williams, ask Marussia. Get the timing wrong in this sport, and no amount of history will save you. Here's the thing to understand. For 30 years, the people who tried to win Formula One mostly went broke. In the last 10, the people who made the real fortunes barely cared about winning at all. They understood something trophy hunters never did. You were never buying a race team, you were buying one of 10 seats at a table that prints money. And a car painted in your colors whose only real job is to make the whole world stop and watch you sit there. The car is the show. The seat is the fortune. And there are only 10 of them left. And if a seat that nobody's allowed to buy sounds strange, wait until you meet the man who spent $5 billion building the tallest tower on Earth and made his real fortune from the empty desert around it. So, you want to buy a skyscraper? That story's playing right now.